Everyone, my name is Amanda Woodward, and I'm an assistant teaching professor at the University of Minnesota. And I'm here today representing FORT, which is the Framework for Open and Reproducible Research Training. So this is a community-driven organization that focuses on helping incorporate open science and reproducibility into teaching contexts. And on the website, there are 7 different clusters where you can find different types of information about open science, teaching, and reproducibility. And it also includes some resources that educators can sort of just plug into their classes to make it super easy to include these things, sections that acknowledge marginalized identities and how research is not equitable at the moment, and also some reflection tools to see what you're already doing in your classes and where areas that you may include more. And I'm really excited to be here with you all and talk to Anne and a little more about her talk on reproducibility. Sorry. So the way the session's going to work is that it's mostly going to be questions. I have a couple of my own, but I'm really hoping that you all have some to share because we have Anne in the room and can get all sorts of lovely feedback on including reproducibility in our classes. So Anne, I really loved your talk with the 6 different ways of including reproducibility and how you started super generally and then got really specific in ways that more advanced students can include reproducibility. And I'm happy to summarize those if you'd like, or if that was something you're planning on doing, I'm happy to have you do that as well.
I had some sort of general remarks, but I wasn't going to summarize in that very specific way, so feel free.
Oh. So just to remind us, Anne gave us 6 different ways that we can include reproducibility, with the first one being to talk about it and explain what it is and why it's important, which I think for me as someone starting to include this stuff in my classes was like, oh, of course, that's the first step. We don't have to take leaps and bounds in all of our courses. So that was a nice reminder. And I thought you shared some really great resources, like the Animal Crossing video of trying to get data from the different characters. And then mentioning that we can also include reproducibility by explaining code, having students think about commenting code and actually doing it, going line by line when they first start out and letting them get broader, and then explaining how technology works and where things are saved on our computers so that they know terms like working directory and where they can find files on their computer. And then in your more advanced classes, focusing on creating those fully reproducible files that they can share and have other people use. And then that really nice connection with service learning where your class was working with 180 to really see how the research can be used to help others and see the meaningfulness behind reproducibility. So it wasn't just this sort of abstract thing that someone else is going to use your data and your code or your analyses, but that they can really do that with different platforms of software and know the person who's going to be using it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anne and let her share her comments.
Thank you, Amanda. So I am just super happy to be here and to get to talk about reproducibility, one of my favorite things to talk about. I want to thank the UK Reproducibility Network, the Framework for Open and Reproducible Research Training, and of course, Project Tier for inviting me to participate. And just a shout out, they are doing awesome and important work. And thanks to Amanda for being willing to moderate the session. So just sort of not specific summary, but as an overview, it can be really easy to think that teaching reproducibility has to involve students replicating a published study or creating a fully reproducible lab. Let me say it certainly can mean that, and there are excellent examples out there, lots of them, about how to do that. I really enjoyed learning about the project that archaeologist Ben Marwick uses. That was the first session in this series, and I really recommend that you check out that video. But teaching reproducibility doesn't have to be that sophisticated. As Amanda just said, it can be as small as introducing what it is and getting it in students' heads. Having a knowledge of reproducibility is important for students who are going on to graduate work. The College of Wooster, we send lots of students on, but the majority we don't send on to academia. And as I discussed in the video, reproducibility is super important outside our walls, and it's almost never talked about. This is, I think, a really unexplored area, but nonprofits, as I talk about, they have a very high turnover in staff, which is unfortunate. But they have to use, or they should be using, reproducibility in order for the next person to take the job to be able to replicate what they've done. So the other thing about this sort of slow approach to reproducibility is that I'm afraid if we go whole hog, that we're going to have difficulty getting some of our colleagues on board. I've brought this more scaffolded, slow approach to faculty by giving presentations similar to the video that you watched. And I've been surprised by who has grabbed a hold and started using concepts of reproducibility in their classes. Don't assume that just people who are hardcore quantitative data people want to be involved. As a matter of fact, I had not published a quantitative piece many years ago when I first got involved with Project Here. I am not a hardcore quantitative person, although I have taught statistics throughout my career. Most social scientists, as you all know, deal with a range of data types in their classes, and I think you'll be really surprised to discover who wants to learn a little bit about reproducibility. Anyway, you've all seen the video. I've talked plenty. Let's do questions of some sort. I guess, Amanda, you'll start.
Yeah, so I'll start with a few questions and then I'll open it up to the group. And for those of you who have questions, if you could use the raise hand feature. And if you don't know where that is, it should be on the bottom of your Zoom menu. If you have trouble finding it or you're not comfortable speaking out loud, I'm also okay with you writing them in the chat, and I'm happy to say them out loud for you if that's the case. And I think my first question for you is actually going to be on the comment you just made. So you've mentioned that you've given several talks like this before, and you've been surprised by the people who've latched on to including reproducibility in their classes. Could you share a couple of examples of the sorts of things that surprised you?
So we have a thing at Worcester where faculty research talks, and the way we get people to come is there's like food and wine. And so we get a wide range of faculty, and talking about reproducibility in that context was really unusual because normally it's a very specifically like, this is my research project and I'm doing this and this and this. But I brought reproducibility to that context, and it was really fun because these were people from English and from all across campus. And we were able to have a broad-based discussion of reproducibility and I talk about this in the video, in its broadest form about being transparent with our methods, those sorts of things, and getting people thinking about what would reproducibility look like in their own fields rather than me coming and telling them. I just brought the basic ideas, and that's been really useful. I also have talked to just the data science people, and I do a different take on it, but I think it's really an excellent roundtable, more informal discussion to bring faculty in. And I've just watched people get really excited about it. So I would urge people to bring this kind of discussion to their own campuses.
Awesome. And I really like the way that you pointed out that it can be sort of this organic conversation that happens when faculty get together across areas. And it can also be something that's a little more specific to maybe that quantitative side that maybe at least I started thinking about reproducibility from. Um, One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is you're using reproducibility in a range of classes, and you've just talked about how others can do the same. Do you have any favorite teaching activities for when you talk about reproducibility in your classes?
So yes, I'm just trying to decide which one to talk about. And I discussed this in the video, but let me talk about it again. I have found that it's really effective to bring in my own reproducible project. So something that I've worked on. Um, Recently, I've been using a data set from Pew and running some basic crosstabs, doing some recoding and running some basic crosstabs. So I've done all of the work, and it's in the project tier format because that's what I learned on. But again, I understand reproducibility can come in many different kinds of forms. But I come to them, I post to our course management software my set of files, and then they download them. And what's good about it is they really have to dig in and look. I've very carefully commented all of the code, but they have to go in, and the first thing they have to do, of course, is change the working directory. And I cannot tell you how difficult this can be. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. So I show on the screen myself changing the working directory. I have, and this is in the video, I have full directions for the working directory. And I have them reproduce, go through and run all the files and see what happens. So this way they understand what the end goal is. Even if it's in a class where we're not going to get to that end goal, we're just going to do some syntax files, that sort of stuff. I think it's useful to see what that might look like. What is a fully reproducible project? Um, so I really like doing that. Um, I like assigning, not to shout myself out, but the conversation piece that I talk about in the video, it's because it's for the conversation, it's for a wide audience, and students seem to really grab a hold of it. And so we can talk about reproducibility based on how might this work. Well, the example in the conversation, if you haven't seen the article, is about a dinner party and people arguing about vaccine safety. And how could reproducibility contribute to that conversation? And students are all about that. I mean, we're living in the world today. And so I like those very applied examples where reproducibility could help us understand the world better. So,
Awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like you mentioned in your talk earlier, you have this example where students go line by line and can actually reproduce your analyses, which you know works because it's yours and you've already tested everything out. And then this broader piece, which I think your conversation art post could be used in a variety of classes, like you said, because you've got the dinner party setting, and who hasn't been to a dinner party where there's some form of disagreement, vaccines being a big one, at least in the US at the moment. Um, so it seems like something they can, like you said, really latch onto and take away like, oh, it's not just about the quantitative piece, it's also about all of the things going on in our lives, and we can really apply this. The other thing you just alluded to was going to be one of my next questions, where we have students today who have grown up with technology their whole lives, which can lead to some assumptions that they know how to use it. But it turns out that they just look technologically savvy. They aren't actually savvy. Beyond the working directory, I'm curious if there are other issues that you've seen and how you've addressed them in your classes.
so yes, the working directory. eh, And I want to say again that there's no necessity to get there if you're just introducing reproducibility. However, this issue of where we save files, I talk about this in the video. I assumed for years that students knew what they were doing. I do think you actually have to teach file structure. And file structure also becomes important because it's difficult to run files out of the download folder. So you need to get students to move those files anyway. So I spend a bunch of time on that, which again seems ridiculous. Um, I also, believe it or not, have to explain to students simply what code is. That code is running in the background of the point and click. I think that the next talk in the series looks really good. It's about moving away from point and click. And I'm going to watch that and I'm super excited. But at the same time, many of us are comfortable with SPSS. We have limited ability to add new things to our courses. So using point and click is the future for many of us. I teach both R and SPSS, but with point and click, it's, as everyone knows, it's simply invisible. The code is simply invisible. And it's useful for students, at the very least, to have a look at that code, to understand what's underneath. Um, I don't want to open a can of worms, but I'm getting increasingly concerned about AI and students using AI to code. So it's our responsibility to make sure that they understand what they're doing. So I explain code, what it is, what it looks like, some of the basic structures of code. So I do all of that, file structures, working directories. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. Nothing is coming to mind, but oh, here's a silly thing. I talked to them about how to name files because so many students just they name their files silly things that they think are funny, and that does not help future self in any way. So the don't assume knowledge with the students, and I joke with them a little bit. I don't want to patronize them and treat them like they're dumb, because they're not. They're our students are amazing, but I talk to them and say, I'd like to teach this. How are, are is this something you already know? I check in with them a lot. No assumptions.
I really like that approach because it seems like year to year, semester to semester, it's going to be a different group of students with different things that they do or don't know. So I like the idea of just asking, is this something you're familiar with? This is why I want to know and what I'm hoping to teach you and why it's important. And then kind of meeting them where they're at. And if it means telling them they can't name their file rubberduck.sav, which was something that I had in one of my classes. And why that won't help them in the future or anyone else.
Yeah,
So
or code 1, code 2, code 3. I
exactly. One of my other questions was hopefully not going to open too much of a can of worms related to AI. Was you had mentioned that the having students comment line by line and having them submit seemed to be, at least now, an AI resistant type of assignment. I'm wondering, how much are you seeing students using AI for those sorts of coding tasks? And what you think we can do to help them learn it versus just relying on the AI?
yeah. So maybe if there's time, we can kind of open this for other people's thinking on this. Um, One of the things that I do is to do a lot of their coding work in class. And I mostly have small classes under 30 students because I teach at a liberal arts college. So I am there, TAs are there, we are working together on coding. So they're not afraid, they're not tempted to use AI. Um, I really encourage them. I mean, I have actually not tried using AI to code with comments, and I am not sure how good it is. Someone else probably knows. Um, but I talk to them a lot about, I know, silly, I said this once already, future self. So future self is going to come to these files, and if they've used AI to do their code or their commenting, they're not going to understand what's going on. And I really encourage them to think themselves into the future and help themselves. But by doing most of the work, the coding work in class, that really reduces the problem. I talk to them about what they lose when they use AI. But frankly, I also talk to them about the possibilities for AI in aiding them later. I I am sort of the camp that there are appropriate uses for AI, but at the introductory level, we really have to get those base skills in place and the base understanding before they move on to maybe use AI in some very exciting ways that maybe I'm at a point in my career where I'll never really understand those exciting ways. But depending on time, I'm happy to hear other people's thoughts on this coding and AI question because it's one I'm worried about and don't feel completely in a place to be able to address it.
I think we could certainly open it up if folks have ideas or opinions on this, because like you said, Anne, I'm also of the camp that there seems to be good and bad, and if you don't have the knowledge to understand it, that is a problem. So you need that intro base. But there seems like some really cool stuff you can do. I'm just not totally sure what all of the cool things are. So does anyone have anything they would like to share or any questions to ask Anne? Yeah, Manuel.
Yeah. So thank you all for this insightful moment. I just want to say something small about the AI, the use of AI when it comes to coding, because with my economics background, we mostly do coding in mostly R, and previously a code that maybe you are running a code and it got stuck at a point. Maybe it has to take like sometimes days for you to figure out what the problem is. But I think with AI now, instead of you spending days to figure out what the problem is, the AI can help you. Maybe when you copy the code and give it in, hey, this is the code I'm running, and this is the problem I'm getting, or this is the result I'm getting. The AI can easily figure out what the problem is or what is wrong with your code, so that you won't spend that much time on it. So in that aspect, I would say using AI in that honest way is pretty good. But asking it to generate the code for you is what I think is not recommended. And that's where we need to draw the line, because I've seen a case where previously when you are using Stata to run a code, and if someone is not there to help you at that moment, it will take you some time to figure out what the problem is. But if you have these tools that will help us reduce the time and also make us efficient, I think it's good in that aspect. Thank you.
Oh, I just think that's a really good point. And the other advantage is if students have that backup once they get stuck and they can't find any help, a lot of times they just throw in the towel and give up because Emmanuel's right. Like I've gotten stuck and it's taken me days. So that's a really helpful comment. Do others have ideas about this or things that you do with students to encourage appropriate use of AI or appropriate use of writing code? Emmanuel, do you have a statement that you use in your syllabus about appropriate use of AI?
Okay, actually, I'm a grad student now, and that's what my professor always advised us to do. So you can use AI to fast check your code, but you are not allowed to use it to code. So that's what we mostly do, and I see it to be very helpful.
All right, thanks. Maybe let's open it up to the audience for some questions about reproducibility in Anne's talk. So again, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. And if you're uncomfortable saying it out loud, you can always put them in the chat. We'll make sure that Anne hears them. All right, so seeing Johnson in the chat. So, hi, I'm a grad student in education applied linguistics from Hong Kong. I know very little about this topic of reproducibility, but it seems like a very important topic. As an educator, how do I plan a course, a workshop, or curriculum to educate my naive undergraduate students who believe that AI can do everything magically and they don't think about reproducibility?
Yeah. AI does seem like magic a lot. So again, I think the way to do this is to use applied examples that students can relate to from the real world. In the video, I talk about the conversation piece in the dinner party scenario, but there are also examples of bad science. Students love to talk about bad science. Um, the example that I use is a study that was done where well, it wasn't actually done, but the report was that they went out and they were trying to see if people could be convinced to support same-sex marriage by meeting somebody who might be affected. Anyway, there were a zillion problems with that study. It would not have been entirely fixed with reproducibility, but there were some key reproducibility issues with that study. So I let students listen to the podcast. So This American Life, which is a national public radio show in the US, which is very popular here, ran a very rah piece about the study and then had to retract it. So I let them listen to the podcasts, but you could choose, there are a million examples out there, you can Google it, of examples where reproducibility is really important. If people are using AI to make their studies reproducible, it is not helpful in that they themselves cannot explain and help others to replicate their studies. So I talk to students about the real world applicability and about real world knowledge that this matters. These are things that cause change in the world. That study about same-sex marriage caused different groups to change tactics, real world implications. So I really start with the real world and why science matters and why transparency of methods matters. So I talk to them about that, and that sort of draws them in. Um, so I guess I would start there. You say, it's interesting in your question, course, workshop, curriculum. I hadn't thought about it that way. So I always think about it, and this just is maybe too many years of teaching, but I always think about just putting it in my classes. And if you may have seen the video, or if you watch the video, there's a way to scaffold it through the classes. But actually, your question makes me think that there might be another format. So maybe like a workshop with seniors, or like, especially if you have a capstone or something like that, where you could just introduce reproducibility, talk about the real world applicability, show some examples, maybe have them run the files. That, I don't know in what contexts that might happen. I'm thinking about my own liberal arts experience, right? So we have a capstone where it could be done. Another place which I think reproducibility gets taught, and here we're out of my area again, libraries are doing this. So workshops through libraries. So for example, our library does various educational, so one could work with the librarians, or the librarians are fully capable of doing it themselves. That might be another place to get it in at universities or colleges without altering the curriculum. Although, again, I would urge you to weave it through. But that's a really interesting idea. And I think we need to think creatively about where to put this, both within and, as you mentioned, outside of the formal curriculum. Oh, so I'm reading the chat. It says, yes, we have capstone projects for our final year students. It could be significant for our students. So if Richard were here, he would talk, I think, to speak for him. At Haverford, they also have a capstone, and all capstones, at least in his department, or maybe across the college, I'm not sure, are required to be reproducible. So that is a really powerful place to put it. And I require it with my capstone students at Wooster who are doing quantitative projects, that it be fully reproducible. Um, I just work with them in the office, but gosh, I think a workshop is a really good idea. So those of you with capstones might consider that.
Yeah, I really like the idea of looking at it as layers of ways to get students to kind of interact with reproducibility. So you can alter your class, maybe the department plays around with the curriculum, but you can also have workshops that are either across departments, through the library, or sort of one-time things at the beginning of capstone to kind of help students as they get started and then evaluate the reproducibility of their projects. Are there other questions from the audience? If they come up again, feel free to raise your hand or write them in the chat. But in the meantime, I'll ask Anne another question. Um, so I really enjoyed the service learning project that you described in your video. It just seems like such a nice way for students to have a concrete audience to keep in mind while they're learning about reproducibility, and do statistics that matter. So they're not just running random numbers that I've generated in my office. Would you be willing to share more about how you structure that project throughout the semester?
Yes, one of the advantages I have is that the person at at 180 at the organization that we're working with. So just if you haven't seen the video, 180 is a local nonprofit here in Worcester. They provide a range of services, but we're largely working on the drug rehabilitation side of the house. So they apply for tons and tons of grants, and they need analyze data to make a case for those grants. They also have to assess their projects as part of the grants. The advantage for me is that they have a data person at 180. So funnily enough, she was my student many, many years ago at the college, and then ended up through a service learning project working at the organization. And actually, we've placed a lot of students there because of the partnership with the organization. So, Trish is her name, and you hear her voice at any rate on the video. She comes in early in the semester and introduces 180. So she does a whole thing about what are the services, how is this important in the community, what are we doing? And so students get excited. Students for the most part are, want to make change in the world, and they feel they want to learn about our local agencies. So there's all this excitement. And then Trish talks them through why they need the data analyzed. She prepares the questions that the agency needs answered. I go over them pretty carefully. A lot of times it's a low-level stats class, and so sometimes we have trouble with levels of measurement. Like she'll want to know something with a dichotomous dependent variable, and we just can't handle it. So she prepares the questions. I go over them carefully. So often I'll run them myself to make sure that there's not going to be an issue. But we start very early in the semester, well before the students have the statistical ability to run the data. So they start with a lit review, development of hypotheses, all of that, because I'm trying to train good research methods. We're not going fishing here. What are the hypotheses? So they get started, they get excited, and they're interesting topics, right? They're questions like, how many sessions does someone need to attend with a counselor to increase their chances of a successful 6-month recovery or something like that? So those are real world grounded questions. And so we do the hypotheses, and I just keep bringing it up even early in the course. Like, what are these questions? Have we learned the statistics yet to address these questions? And then we do it gradually. And as I talk about, essential to the project is that Trish can replicate their findings. She has to be able to do it so that she can give her presentations to the granting agencies. So this is a grounded reason for students to be really careful about reproducibility. Now, as I say, it's a 100, it's not a 100, but it's essentially a 100 level stats course. We're doing like basic descriptive statistics. I managed to get to linear regression, but barely. Um, it's really hard to fit stuff in. We do not end up with fully reproducible files at the end. I can't do it. But we end up with one syntax file from each group with all of the commands that they executed, and it's fully commented. So Trish has found that she's able to replicate, and it's helpful for her as well, like to go back in and look at the recoding. I forget if I said this or not, but a huge issue we've had that is just making me crazy is that I use SPSS in that class. I have other classes where I use R. Trish doesn't have access to SPSS because it's wildly expensive, as I'm sure and nonprofits can't afford it. I tried doing the project in R, but the learning time for a nonprofit to pick up R is just proving to be insurmountable. It's too much. So this is an ongoing problem with the project where she understands everything that's happened because she can read the code, but if she needs stuff rerun in SPSS, I have to do it. And that's unfortunate. I have talked in the past about using Excel, and I just can't bring myself to do it. So this is, just in the spirit of full honesty, this has been an ongoing issue for service learning with nonprofits. My experience, and maybe other people have different, but my experience with nonprofits is that usually someone there is pretty competent at Excel. But I'm not. And yeah, so that's an ongoing issue. But in answer to your question, I start early. I generate excitement because these are real issues. Students care about drug abuse and substance misuse in the community. And then they meet Trish. And so they're doing it. They'll talk about, oh, we have to get this right so Trish understands, which is really nice. So it gives the whole thing real world meaning and a personal connection.
I also just really like the idea of them going through the class and saying, we have to comment this so Trish understands, because then they're really thinking about the reproducibility piece, but they have a person in mind and they know sort of what knowledge they have, or at least some of it. And then Diane's mentioning in the chat that one of the reasons given by researchers in the importance of teaching R to undergrads is because SPSS won't be available once they leave and R can continue.
Yeah, so that's why I switched 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm using R in everything except for this basic stats class. And I've tried it in the basic stats class. It can work. And I urge people to do that. It's absolutely right. And especially, I keep telling students, if you're going to go work in a nonprofit and you can run R, this solves the problems. But until we get a generation trained and willing to go into nonprofit, whatever else work, we're stuck in this bind. But I absolutely agree. And R, I mean, as we all know, R keeps getting easier. Um, the other thing I was thinking about doing is I think I'm going to run a R workshop in the community for nonprofits. Because I'm at a point in my career now where I can do some, you know, stuff that might not be traditionally considered if one was trying to get tenure. But if I know that there's some interest in the community, and if we were able to find a time and space to do that, I also think it would be good for college community relationships to do that. But yeah, I hear you.
Doing our workshops in the community seems great, and like it could help solve some of the issues in the meantime with the nonprofit project.
Yeah, and I think it'd be fun to teach too. Sort of all of our students are basically are between 18 and 22. It might be kind of a fun teaching challenge to talk to grown-ups.
Absolutely. My last question for you was just, you have lots of experience with reproducibility and teaching. Is there one piece of advice you would give to people who are maybe starting out and including reproducibility in their own teaching?
Well, I'm going to say the same thing I've already said, and yeah, I keep repeating myself. This is not an all or nothing proposition. And you might be someone who doesn't know how to do fully reproducible files. That's okay. Um, Working it in gradual ways, scaffolding it into the curriculum. The other thing I was thinking about is if you're able to at your school have a discussion with the faculty about where this is going to fit in the curriculum. I also urge you to think about, does this fit with your school's learning goals and mission and value statement and all that? And my bet is it absolutely does. Um, it fits directly with Wooster's. And that gives me an entryway to say to people, this is part of our mission. Where are we going to find it in the curriculum? And maybe your part is a small one. Maybe you're just talking about it in intro poli-sci as this is reproducibility. You need to think about it. But finding those places across the curriculum where this can be fit in and consistent with your institution's mission is really useful, and it's an applied skill. And right now, my experience has been that students are really looking for those applied skills to put on their resume, and it can just go right there in that list of skills. So I'm sort of sagging here by accident. I had like 2 seconds of concluding remarks, and you sort of started me down this path. Um, I think also there's so many opportunities in terms of publishing for all of us. So reproducibility is still sort of new. And the article that I published with Trish, by the way, on teaching reproducibility has really begun to gain traction. So this is an area that's exciting for us for new publication possibilities. Also, if you develop something awesome, you are going to want to get it out there, whether that be sort of a journal or putting it on one of the sponsoring organizations right here, Forward and Tier, the websites. There are places to share what you're doing and really cool conferences. This has completely, I don't know, I was sort of at a midpoint in my career. This has offered just exciting possibilities for me in my career. And there's lots of room in any way for others to join, even if it's an introductory activity. We need those. So yeah, that's my pitch.
I think those are all really great pieces of advices, and I'm excited to apply some of them in my own teaching. I know I kind of led you toward your concluding remarks. Did you have other ones that you wanted to share?
I think I managed to, oh, just one other point, which we've already talked a lot about, discussing reproducibility broadly so that everybody can come in under the umbrella. So, um, there wasn't time, nor do I have the expertise to talk about qualitative data, but there's a lot of room to talk about reproducibility with qualitative data. They have some unique, I shouldn't say they, I publish qualitative, have some unique challenges in terms of confidentiality with the data, but there's so much room to talk about reproducibility, but outside of just statistical data. And that's exciting. So I would urge all of you, when you're talking about reproducibility, to, have a big tent, and emphasize transparency of methods and transparency of analysis. Yeah, those were all my points.
Awesome. And thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And I really enjoy the message that we can start small and include reproducibility in content classes, kind of across disciplines, and we can build up as students get more experience and as the content of the classes relates. And I've got a lot to think about in terms of activities for my own classes based on what you shared. So I really appreciate that. That's going to be the end of our talk. And just as a reminder, I know this was already said, but our next symposium will be on October 23rd at 1400 BST. And the speaker is Andy Jones, who's an associate professor of health risk behaviors at Liverpool John Moores University. And the video is titled Breaking Up with SPSS, Can We Get Students to Move Away from Point and Click? And if that is of interest to you, I'll put the registration link in the chat, followed by the recording of Andy's talk. So there's the registration and there's the video. Thank you all so much for being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day or night, depending on what time zone you're in.
Thank you.